Hello YouTube. So it's a beautiful summer night in balmy Louisiana, and I watched some of Thunderfoot's material, recent material. He pumped out like 3 videos in like 2 days, doing that thing where he spews vitriol all over Anita Sarkeesian. By the way, this video is not a defense of Anita Sarkeesian. I don't really care. Right? I'm totally apathetic towards her projects and her channels. I have no ill will against her, and I'm not a fan either. Thunderfoot, on the other hand, I think I have the same experience with Thunderfoot as a lot of YouTubers do. Of 5 years ago, when I was a lurker, strictly a lurker, I remember watching his "Why Do People Laugh at Creationist" videos and thinking that they were great. You know what I mean? And over time, like as Thunderfoot seems to be, whenever he starts to talk about the social sciences, he seems to just get weirdly off base. He doesn't seem to understand how the social sciences operate and how people come to sort of the conclusions that they do. And it makes for some really weird inferences. And specifically, I'm thinking of the video Anita Sarkeesian destroyed! I think the most charitable version of what Thunderfoot's claim is that he seems to be saying that video games don't have long-term effects on people's behavior, right? Maybe true, maybe not. I don't know. It's an empirical question. I would prefer it if it weren't true. I don't like the idea that there might be some credence to the screaming mothers, post-Columbine mothers, screaming at Marilyn Manson, right? I don't like to think that there's weight to what they're saying. But if I step back and I really think about it, I begin to think about, is it really tenable to hold the position that things like video games and media don't impact long-term behavior? And I don't know. I don't really know the answer to it, but it seems to me to be more plausible that it does affect behavior. I think that it's the wrong question to ask, does it affect behavior? And the right question to ask is something more like, how does it affect behavior? And there we get into really interesting questions. Now, forgive me if I'm interpreting Thunderfoot uncharitably, but what I got out of the video was that he seems to hold that no, things like video games do not affect the long-term behavior of a human being, right? Now, I'd propose one basic piece of counter evidence to this, which is obviously advertising, right? Advertising seems to me to be predicated on the assumption that media affects how people operate in the world. It affects the decisions that people make, which amounts to basically the same thing as affecting behavior. At least I don't see a meaningful distinction. It seems like this whole field, this whole gigantic realm of commerce, the advertising industry, wouldn't exist if it were the case that media does not shape long-term behavioral patterns, or at least have some impact, right? Whatever that impact might look like. If you think about things like super PACs, even, right? If you think about, isn't this the whole debate on campaign finance reform? When we have that conversation, are we not assuming that advertising space that candidates buy affects people's decisions, right? We clearly take that assumption for granted when we're talking about something like a super PAC, political, campaign finance reform, or advertising. So it seems that there's all this space where we just take that assumption for granted. And I remember thinking, a friend of mine actually pointed it out to me. He said something like, I'm going to say a word, and you say the first word that you think of, right? And I think there were 3 of us in a group. The word that he said was car insurance, and the 3 of us at the same time said Geico. And it was a really disturbing moment, right? It was really like, horrific moment. It's the moment that you realize that, like, oh, you know, associations in my mind have been linked together through no choice of my own, right? I mean, I guess I have consumed the TV commercials that put that association there. That's the only vehicle through which that association was forged, right? Through media, through commercials. Thunderfoot, in his video, talks about how, you know, when Grand Theft Auto was released, or any number of video games were released that involve mass violence, you know, we didn't see crime rates spike, right? But when I hear this argument, it's like saying, well, clearly Geico commercials don't have an effect on a person because after those wave of commercials with the gecko came out, we didn't see an increase in the belief that geckos could talk. Saying violent video games will directly contribute to the crime rate in such an obvious one-to-one way, it seems to me that that's the stupidest possible interpretation of the claim that media shapes in some part our behavior. Now, again, I don't know how that works, right? I don't in any way claim to know how that works. What it seems to be, though, if I had to guess, it would have to do with how things are associated with other things, how things stick in your memory, and how things are framed. If you even look at how polling works, political polling, right? The way you frame a question ends up having a very large impact on the answers you get. This is just a well-known fact. How you frame an issue is going to contribute to how people think about that issue. And this is where we get into things like what's called Orwellian language, right? If the Republicans say, let's get the government off your back, right? What they mean is, let's cut social services. But in framing it in that way, let's get the government off your back, what it sounds like is that there's something on your back that's weighing you down, and they're going to help relieve you of this burden. If you say, let's slash social services, I'd imagine that even though those two statements have the same content, you would have a very different reaction from people hearing one statement versus the other. Now, I don't know. I'm sure there's, well, I know for a fact there's all sorts of empirical data on the issue. And feel free to go look that up and think about it. Insofar as the media does shape thought, and I don't want to claim that that's a large portion of anything, right? It might just, I don't know the percentage of anything, right? It could be a very, very, very small effect on a human being. But it seems to me that there is an effect. That seems to be difficult to challenge. How big of an effect that is, qua different like personality types, is a question, and also how those kinds of effects work. And again, it seems to be like informal matters, right? It seems to be, again, like associations between things and framing things, right? It doesn't seem to be so much about the content as it is about the form. I don't know if someone like Anita Sarkeesian is right that portrayals of women that she finds objectionable will be internalized by the public in the way that she thinks it will be, right? I sort of have my doubts, actually. From what I have seen of her, she seems to be pretty naive and a little ham-fisted in that kind of thing. I'd imagine that how the mind takes in, you know, tens of thousands of media messages a day, how that works is probably more subtle and nuanced than her channel really represents, or feminist frequency videos. They don't seem to have a respect for the complexity of the issue, of how behavior works and how that's related to, again, media and discourse in general. So there's something naive about it, that I'm curious about. I would suspect that Anita Sarkeesian realizes that. I mean, I think she has a graduate degree in something, some social science. I don't know what. I think that she probably is aware that the picture that she's painting is simplistic, which then makes me wonder, is she just this cynical liar that everyone wants to paint her out to be? And I don't know. It makes me wonder what her end is. It might just be something like trying to get people to think more about the content that they consume, right? If it is that, then what she does is fine. It should that her videos probably are effective with respect to that aim. So yeah, I don't know. It seems like gamers, and I'm a little bit of a gamer, casual gamer. I'm friends with a lot of pretty hardcore gamers, and they do seem very protective about what they do. Thunderfoot, on the other hand, and all the gamers who seem to be terribly up in arms against Anita Sarkeesian, seem to really have also a kind of methodological special pleading, in that I would imagine that if we were talking about any other field of discourse, such as, again, advertising or campaign finance reform or something like that, they'd be perfectly happy to take on the assumption that no, media does have an effect on the person. But when it comes to their hobby, they're less likely to actually take that on as a real possibility. It seems to me to be unavoidable that I, as a human subject, am ultimately constituted by a series of biological and cultural forces, by the discourse around me, by the kinds of conversations and activities that I participate in. All of these things end up making up me, and it seems like Thunderfoot has taken this weird position where he wants to say something like yeah, except about things that I like that other people might be attacking, right? I don't know. Again, maybe that's an uncharitable rendition of the content of Thunderfoot's video, but I don't think it is. Hopefully that's some food for thought. And I want to thank Bob Smearfack for, again, shouting me out. He's a good guy. If you don't know him, check out his channel. He did a very wonderful video. It's like a half-hour long, where he talks about a lot of YouTubers that I know and love, and I'm honored to be one among them. So yeah, have a good day, guys.